and welcome to the EMJ GOLD podcast, brought to you by EMJ, your number one open access destination for HCPs and pharma globally. Hi Jade, how are you on this fine morning?
Very well, thank you, Isabel. How are you doing?
Good, looking forward to sharing today's episode.
Yes, and today's episode is a very exciting one actually. I'm happy to be sharing an interview that I recently had with BMS's Anita Gandhi.
Great.
And she came onto the show in aid of Blood Donation Week here in the UK and World Blood Donor Day, which I think is on the 14th of June. On the podcast, she talks about the great advancements that we've actually seen in haematology over the last decade and much, much more.
Very good, but before we get into all that, it would be great to share a bit more information on Anita, I think. So, as you mentioned, Anita works at BMS, where she currently acts as the Vice President of Translational Development, leading not only the hematology translational development team at the company, but solid tumour, immunology, cardiology and neurology as well.
Lots of duties there for Anita. She's got over 20 years of industry experience, including drug discovery and translational development of small molecules and biologics in haematology from phase 1 to approval. Anita also leads a group of laboratory, clinical biomarker and disease scientists as well to deliver on biomarker strategies, patient selection, so much more. She's very, very accomplished.
Sounds like a very busy lady. Well, a lot under her belt, and she was also the former recipient of the HBA Rising Star Award, a brilliant award, which I'm sure she was very well deserving to be awarded of.
Absolutely, we do talk about in the discussion, along with her path into industry, what the future could look like for patients with haematological conditions, and so much more.
Sounds brilliant. Should we listen in?
I think we should. Hi, Anita. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Jade. Thank you. How are you?
Lovely, very good, thank you. You're joining me here on the cusp of what is World Blood Donor Week, which is a very exciting week for all. I'm trying desperately to book in my own blood donation appointment, but the UK Blood Bank, I think, is completely over capacity, which is a very good thing to see, but I can't get an appointment at all.
Yes, no, it's really exciting. I think it's so important that people go out there, and I just want to say thank you for donations, and thanks to everyone that does this. It's really important for our community.
It is, absolutely. But before we do get into all the wonderful world of haematology, which I know you're very interested in, I think it would be great for our audience to get to know you a little bit more. So my first question for you that I would love to ask is, what first inspired you to pursue a career within the pharmaceutical industry?
Thank you for the question. I think, when I was contemplating my career choices, I did my undergraduate in basic biology, and then I went on to molecular pharmacology to get my PhD. And at that point, I think we were at a really important decision or sort of change in the industry where biotech was becoming really interesting. There was still the world of, DNA sequencing and sort of that molecular understanding of disease was really burgeoning. And at the same time, there was a lot of new technology that was coming out, new modalities for drugs, et cetera. And the era and the thinking around personalized medicine, I think, was just beginning. So it was a really exciting time, and I had sort of a choice to make at that time of whether or not I wanted to stay in science and do a postdoc in academia, which a lot of my friends and colleagues did, or if I wanted to do something else. And at the time, I knew pretty early on that I wanted to start in that I sort of really want to be closer to having an impact on patients. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I did know that it did not mean kind of staying at the bench for the rest of my career. And I had an opportunity to join a pharmaceutical company, and I found a postdoc program, which back then was not very common, but I found a small pharmaceutical company that actually had a postdoc opening, which I applied to. So really my drive was to be closer to the patients, to bring science, to make it more accessible to patients, and to really, drug development to me was at the time, which I didn't know, was really going to be that perfect mix of marrying science and having closer patient impact. So really that's what really appealed to me, almost 25 years ago now.
Gosh, it's a great time to look back on. And yeah, really lucky that you landed on that postdoc opening. And I know you're very interested in that sort of academy industry partnership that goes on. So really great to see that that's what actually got you into the industry in the first place.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I wish it could have been, I can say that it was perfectly planned, but it was a lot of cold calls and cold emails back then, and just talking to people and networking a little bit. And I got very fortunate actually.
Yeah, it's really good. A bit of a salesperson yourself, clearly. But it's really good that you put yourself out there. And I know that's something that a lot of young people at that age, when they're trying to break into an industry, can find it quite daunting. So good to see that you're an example of that working out.
Yeah. Well, it's harder back then. Nowadays with social media and LinkedIn and everything else, it's much more easy and accessible. It's probably saturated and overloaded. It's probably quite the opposite side of the spectrum. But yeah, no, it was a really good move for me. I had colleagues who picked other paths. You know, they went into more of sort of technology companies, into sales. Another one went into sort of the patent industry and the legal side of things. So, you know, it's hard when you're sort of coming out of grad school to know what all the different options are. At least back then, I think now there's a lot more visibility into what a career is after graduate work in the sciences. But yeah, it was a good decision. It was probably the most important decision I had made up until that point of my career. So it ended up being a good one.
Gosh, and now it's landed you at BMS, where you currently are, and you're the Vice President of Hematology Translational Medicine there, if I'm correct. Can you tell us a little bit more about your role at BMS and especially what aspects of your work you find the most fulfilling?
Sure. So as you mentioned, my role right now is heading up translational development at Bristol Myers Squibb. What that means here at BMS is sort of what it means everywhere else in sort of translation, what translational development is. So the way I think about it is, you know, we're bringing science to bear on drug development. So we're really in that crux between preclinical and clinical, which is why it's called translational. So we learn from preclinical models like cell lines and animal models, and we use those learnings to apply it to patients in the clinic and vice versa. We're collecting samples and biopsies from cancer patients, for example, from our clinical trials, and then we're bringing them back into the laboratory to understand how our drugs are working. So in a nutshell, you know, what translational development means is we try to provide scientific support and data to pick the right dose and schedule for patients, to help decide which diseases to go into, to help decide if a patient selection strategy is needed or a diagnostic is needed, what combination partners our drugs should have, and really understand sort of at the biological level why a drug is working or isn't working. So understanding sort of the mechanism of resistance. And then finally, you know, being able to differentiate our drugs from other molecules and other drugs we have in our own pipeline, but also what's happening in the ecosystem and in the external world and with competitors. I never like to think of drugs, other companies being competitors, because I think we all have the same goal, which is to bring, you know, new drugs to the patients that need them. But it's also really important that we all together are putting the resources in the right place. We don't want to double down on the same things over and over. We want to make sure that we're bringing a lot of options to patients. And so understanding how our drugs compare to others in the marketplace is really important. And then lastly, I think that one of the most important things we do is really understanding how our drugs are working. Oftentimes, they are understood in very, you know, simplistic models in vitro in the laboratory, which is the best way to study them. But once they get into patients and into human beings, that's when the fun starts. And that's when you realize that there's a lot of complexity that happens that you don't see in the laboratory. And sort of teasing that complexity apart is really what really makes my job so interesting. I think being in translational development, dealing in that sort of chaotic, complex universe of trying to understand patient level data, tumor genetics and genomics, et cetera, is what makes it so hard, but also so sort of interesting. And once you sort of crack the nut there, I think that's what makes it so fulfilling as well, is that you're learning from the patients. That's the ground truth. That's where the most important discoveries can be made. And so, you know, that's what I love about what I do. It's really the complexity of the drugs that we're trying to develop, the diseases that we're trying to impact, and just sort of everything going on in the world and trying to navigate all of that together.
Oh, thank you for that. It does sound like a very complex role to be in, but it sounds very rewarding from what you're saying. I really love what you said there about companies not being competitors in the market, because like you say, you're all bringing value to patients. It just be that some companies do it in different ways to you guys, and nobody's really racing to get there. It's all about who can bring the value to patients first, but there's no sort of pushing each other off the sidelines. So yeah, really great to see.
Yeah. I mean, that's the idea, right? Obviously, there's different aspects to that, but I think, we all work very well together. I think maybe that's one kind of misconception when people think about pharma, is that we're all really competing against each other. But there are many examples where we actually collaborate and we come together, and we work towards a certain goal. And that's across the industry, like across pharmas, but that also includes academic collaborations as well. So there's lots of examples of consortia and efforts and working together with the health authorities as well. With the FDA, we collaborate very closely. So, yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We're all in the business of science and bringing therapies to patients that have really high unmet needs, that really sort of bind us together. And we work in really hard diseases, right? We work in leukemia and pancreatic cancer and in Alzheimer's disease. I mean, these are huge global problems for our community and for the aging population across the world. So that's really the problems that we need to solve, rather than sort of competing with each other.
Expertly put, I have to say. So as we mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, we are currently in Blood Donor Week, which is really showcasing the urgent need for more donations across the globe. So do you think there are any unmet needs in blood cancer that you think could benefit from more awareness sort of at this scale that might be going unseen at the moment?
Certainly. I mean, I think when we think of unmet need, well, first of all, blood cancers, there are over 100 different types. I'm sure it's growing as well as we understand, tumor genetics, and we start slicing and dicing diseases into molecular segments, et cetera. But over 100 for sure. And still sort of the greatest unmet needs are in many of them, where there actually might be a lot of drugs, but cure is still not achieved. And so patients are still relapsing. Here at BMS, but many other companies as well, have really developed really, really great drugs, for example, in patients with a blood-bone disorder called multiple myeloma. And so while the overall survival of these patients has really grown quite a bit because of all the new drugs and therapies, there's really still no cure. And so the incidence of the disease is actually growing. So I think that's one example. But then there are other diseases where the survival is quite short. And as soon as a patient is diagnosed, they're really in a dire situation. And so AML, acute myeloid leukemia, is one of those instances where there's a huge unmet need. I think pancreatic cancer as well, PDAC, is another area where as soon as patients are diagnosed, they're already in very late stage sort of metastatic settings. And so, the area of earlier detection is really important. And then earlier treatment is also really important. And there are some diseases where we've made huge strides and some where we really need to do better. And then there are more of sort of what we call sort of non-malignant or sort of more benign hematological diseases like sickle cell disease that are really unmet need for the global community as well. So those are just sort of a handful, but there are many others, and many of them are rare disorders. Hematological diseases in general have a lower prevalence compared to other diseases, for example, in the solid tumor setting. But it's still really important because these patients are at such high unmet need, and it's really important that we continue to invest in the science and in the discoveries to develop drugs for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, no matter how rare a disease is, there's still patients at the end of the funnel that could really benefit from those developments. So looking back on it, what's been an advancement that's made a real difference for blood cancer patients over the last decade, looking back?
Yeah. Well, I think there have been so many, and I think, one of the reasons why there's been so much progress, I think, is because there's been such a dedication by hematologists and clinician scientists and basic scientists to really understand the basic biology of the disease. And I think with hematological diseases, I think there's an advantage because it's more the tumor cells, for example, are more readily accessible because they are liquid, right? You can get them from the blood, you can get them from the bone marrow. They're just more accessible, and it's less invasive, for example, than getting a biopsy from your lung or from your liver, for example. So there have been tremendous advances. Just to name a few, I think the field of immuno-oncology, for example, T-cell engagers and bispecifics, and now trispecifics, are emerging. These are, off-the-shelf options for patients that have really been a game changer for patients. And, they've really taken off, and you can see that in the survival curves of all the clinical trials. Many of them are approved now. So I think that's one huge advancement. I think, CAR T is the one that I think will come to everyone's mind. This is, the concept of using one's own immune system and engineering it outside the body, and then reintroducing it to the patient to fight their own cancer. I mean, this is things that we only talked about on paper not too long ago. And now there are approved drugs for myeloma and for lymphoma, and we're seeing really great, durable remission. So that's another one to highlight. I think gene therapy is another one that's really come of age, especially in, new methods like CRISPR technology. And that's being used now in sickle cell disease and beta thalassemia. So that's another huge breakthrough. Targeted therapies, again, because we understand the genetics of tumors now in heme diseases. And by that, I mean, mutations, for example, we can have targeted therapies. And this kind of merged well with the advances that we're having on the chemistry side and the protein side to be able to really understand, how do we specifically target mutated proteins, for example. So now, we have diseases in one of those high unmet areas, like I mentioned, AML, where we have FLT3 inhibitors and IDH1/2 inhibitors and BCL2 inhibitors, et cetera, that have really made a difference for patients. And we're starting to see that more and more on the solid tumor side, these more targeted therapies and precision medicine approaches. So that really was, fed by the technology advances for next generation sequencing as well. So now we can get, an entire characterization of a patient's tumor when they get diagnosed. And that's been really, really powerful. So those are just a few of the advances. I guess the other one I'd call out is around MRD. So the ability to detect minimal residual disease or measurable residual disease in a hematology patient has been a game changer. And, not only does it help us understand kind of why patients aren't completely being cured, but now novel ways to actually accelerate drug development. So the example of this is in multiple myeloma, the use of MRD as a surrogate endpoint is really coming of age. And that happened, there was an inflection point after many, many years of hard work by many scientists and physicians around the world. And that sort of came to bear sort of in spring of last year. So now we can actually use MRD potentially as a surrogate endpoint in multiple myeloma trials. So huge advances, both on the science, working with regulators, collaborating together. I think there's so much more we can do. I think, the field of artificial intelligence is, I'd be remiss if I didn't say anything about AI because everyone's talking about it. But I think the power of AI starts with the data that you have. And we have a tremendous amount of data in hematological cancers that we can feed into these models and these systems. So I'm really excited about how we can do things even better, even faster and smarter in the future, especially as it applies to drug development. And I think the heme space is really, really ripe for something like that.
Definitely. I'm really excited to see where it goes in the next 10 years as well, looking back on the decade. So do you think the future for blood cancer treatment is just faster, more rapid in terms of diagnostic treatment? Or do you think there's more are there more therapies out there that we might not have heard of yet that are sort of rising on that could be the next CAR T?
Yeah, I think both. I think both. I think we're going to be able to do things faster and better and have what we call, higher probability of success coming out of phase 3s. I think that's still a challenge and there's still uncertainty. So, the more we can invest in things that we believe are going to read out positive and bring real value to patients. And the value isn't just around, extending their life by a certain number of years or months, but it's also around the quality of life. And there's so much data around that and opportunity for us to do that as well. I think we still have a lot of toxicities with the drugs that we approve now. And, patients they deserve better and they want better. And we all need to work towards that. So that's something I'm really excited about, is to kind of bring all that data together holistically and learn from everything that we know and just do things better in the future. To your second point, absolutely. I think there's so much unmet need. There's still, while we have so many drugs for these patients, there's still opportunities to discover new things, to discover new targets. I think, the human body and our cells are very, very smart. They can get around drugs pretty easily, unfortunately, and that's what cancer is really good at. So being able to predict how tumor cells actually can develop escape mechanisms, whether it be tumor intrinsic or tumor extrinsic in the tumor microenvironment, I think is going to be really important. I think there are areas and pathways that tumor cells use that we haven't tapped into as much, like metabolism, for example. So I think that's going to be really important. And then, so I think the future is going to be, we're already in the era of personalized medicine and, choosing the right drugs for the right patients. I think that's going to continue and we can do it even better. I think we've got plenty of drugs that we can figure out how to sequence them a little bit differently to really maximize their value and potential and combine them in smarter ways. I think that's going to be really important. And then for things like CAR T, it's still burdensome for patients and they have to go into the clinic. It's not readily available to a lot of, people in the US and outside of the US just because of geography. So coming up with some off-the-shelf examples and products for cell therapy, I think will be a game changer. I think the field of protein engineering is coming of age as well, and gives us so much optionality to design antibodies and bispecifics and T-cell engagers. So that's an exciting space to watch. So yeah, a lot of things that that we've already done, and I think it's just going to get better and faster in the next decade. So I'm really looking forward to that.
That's amazing. But I can't imagine what we're going to be like in the next 20 years or so.
Yes. Well, I can't even imagine, because if you had asked me 10 years ago, could you imagine where we are today, or 20 years ago? I don't even think I could imagine that. But yeah, I can't wait. It's it's an exciting time to be in healthcare. It's an exciting time to be in science. And marrying that with all the other advances that are happening with AI and technology and our ability to communicate, across the world, even better now than we have in the past. I think all of that is just going to, will come together naturally.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, as you say, very exciting time to be in the space. So we're also now 10 years on from your HBA Rising Star Award. So congratulations, 10 years on. I know it's still something you're very proud of. What did receiving this award mean to you? And now in 2025, what does it mean to you a decade later?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. This one is really special to me. So this is, award I received from the HBA as an early career scientist and drug developer. And I was navigating a lot at that time. I had aspirations of a successful career as a translational scientist. I was juggling kids and work and really trying to do my best. I had two little ones at the time, and it was a huge vote of confidence from my managers and from my leaders at the time. And that was what was most meaningful to me. It wasn't so much about the actual work that I was doing, but just that bit of confidence. And that's sometimes all that it really takes, is to know that people, even one person, like really believes in you. And then taking a moment to have self-reflection and saying to yourself, yeah, maybe I actually can do this, even though it's really hard. There is, there's, hard times come and go, good times come and go. But just having sort of that perspective and that vote of confidence was so meaningful to me at the time. And still, when I look back, I see it as a really critical inflection point, kind of in the way I thought about my career and as I thought about what I wanted to do in the future. And I still point to that inflection point many times when I talk about my career journey. So I'm so thankful to the HBA. I'm so thankful to the program. I'm so thankful to the many mentors and managers and inspirational leaders that I've had the opportunity to learn from and interact with over the years. It's really made a difference in my life. And I think it makes a difference in many of the women's lives and men who work with women in healthcare. Because again, it's all about the patients that we serve. And the more that we can hold hands together and support each other and recognize each other, I think in the end, it produces better products for the patients that we want to get these therapies to. So a very meaningful time in my life and reflecting back on it with such, positive sentiment.
Lovely. I think that's a wonderful note to end on there, with a big congratulations to you and to the HBA and other organisations like it. Thank you so much for your time today, Anita. It's been wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed listening into that, Jade. Thank you very much for the interview. Would you be able to share your key insight with all our listeners?
I absolutely can. I really enjoyed hearing Anita's thoughts on what the HBA Rising Star Award meant to her and her career. I think obviously it's such a good initiative, and at the end of the day, it's a really great way of catapulting women in the industry into the spotlight. And yeah, very well deserving of that award, I think.
I think for me, I really agree with that, of course. But I also liked hearing about her drive for getting into the industry, where she was talking about jumping on the phone to chase down academic positions and really just pursuing what she wanted to achieve. I think that really showed the value of persistence, and that was a really important lesson that I took away.
Absolutely, and I think a great lesson to end the episode on. Thank you so much again to Anita for joining us today, and thank you to you at home for listening.
Do be sure to tune in next week, where we will be back with another exciting episode. But until then, it's bye from us.
See you.